most of these projects stay within a pilot phase. So there's a lot of pilot. We pilot this, we innovate around this and all that. And the question is, when do we move from pilot to bigger scale? So it's these kind of little actions that we do as individuals, which has a ripple effect. If every individual out there who knows about the SDGs and whatever will share with one person, I think we will go far.
Hi, welcome to our podcast, The Zero Hunger Project. And today we have a really fascinating story to talk about. We have Dr. Hlami here, and we are going to talk about a mantra that I heard from her the first, and it is scale up, scale out, and scale deep. Now, will that solve world hunger? We're going to talk and we're going to find that out. So I'm going to pass it on. I'm Suman.
There we go. And I'm Stacia.
I'm going to pass it over to you.
It's my pleasure to introduce to you today Dr. Ngwenya is a South African-born global citizen, a recipient of the South African Presidential Award of Order for the Baobab and Bronze in 2021 for her contributions to sustainable agriculture, education, and community empowerment. With a PhD in sustainable agriculture and 33 years of experience, she's an expert in facilitating systemic change in agri-food systems. She's known for her exceptional skills in moderating high-level panels, policy dialogues, and UN multi-stakeholder engagements and facilitation of multi-stakeholder engagements at all levels. A former senior manager in government, university lecturer, and international consultant, she has done assignments work in over 55 countries. He must be exhausted. Engaging diverse stakeholders and navigating the complexities of global food systems. It says here you are a proud mother of three, a poet, and an author. Welcome. Thank you for joining us this afternoon.
Thank you. And thank you for inviting me. I'm joining all the way from South Africa. So it is evening, my side. So I'm happy to be here. We work in the global space. So anytime it's tea time.
And you look so bright and fresh. So I admire that in you. But I suppose if you've worked in 55 countries, you have a lot of experience looking like that in the middle of the night.
So this is amazing. And I want to tell our viewers where I first met you, because I think that's really an important start. So I was in Rome at the World Food Forum where you spoke, and I was so fascinated with your talk, and it really touched deep. And when I came back last year from the World Food Forum, I kept your mantra in my mind all the time, literally, and figured out how to work around those mantras. So I'm going to dig right into it and say, tell us a little bit about this principle that you talk about of digging deep,
Scaling up,
scaling deep, and scaling out. So tell us a little more about it.
Okay, thank you so much. I remember the event that we were together in Rome. I was requested to facilitate a session where they were talking about scaling up, scaling deep, and scaling out. And I think maybe just to give the listeners a bit of background, so this event was about innovations. So within the agriculture space or the agri-food systems, we talk about innovations. And these innovations, it's not just about technology, but we have, different types of innovation. We talk about, institutional innovations. We talk about technical innovations, but there are many other innovations that we see. And we know that within the agri-food space, there is a lot of research that is done. There are a lot of, ideas. There are a lot of, projects. But most of these projects stay within a pilot phase. So there's a lot of pilot. We pilot this, we innovate around this and all that. And the question is, when do we move from pilot to bigger scale? But when we talk about going to scale, there are different levels of scaling. So maybe scaling up, you may remember I was saying scaling up, scaling out, and scaling deep. So really scaling up in this case, it means that whatever initiative that we do, we institutionalize it within processes. So whatever ideas, then it actually gets into institutions, it gets into policies to a level where institutions can actually even make resources available to make sure that, whatever that idea that, or maybe that innovation become part and parcel of that institution in terms of policies, in terms of resources. Hence, we talk about scaling up. But scaling out, here it's when you have an idea and you replicate it. It's like you move from one, it's a lateral expansion of, those innovations and ideas. So that is about, replication. You could replicate whatever innovation that works, either to other countries or to other areas within the areas where you're working. But scaling deep, which is very, very close to my heart, it has to do with how people begin to change behaviors, how people begin to internalize, whatever ideas or innovations that we're talking about. So in a nutshell, scaling up is about institutionalization around policies and all that. Scaling out, it's about replication, where you expand, whatever ideas or innovations into other spaces. And scaling deep, it's about internalizing, where people begin to internalize things and they begin to change their way of thinking. They change, behaviors based on those innovations that we're talking about. So yes, let's go beyond just a pilot and let's scale up, let's scale out, and let's scale deep.
How do you feel that the Global South is doing in that regard? What report card would you give them if you had to grade them?
It's very interesting. In your introduction, you were talking about my role as a facilitator. I facilitate a lot of, multi-stakeholder engagements, and it gives me an opportunity to work with different stakeholders. I work with policymakers, I work with farmers, I work with investors, I work with all different sort of stakeholders. It's very interesting because when I look at that question, depending on who I have in the room, the scorecard will be different. So, for example, if I have, policymakers, they are, in most cases, they look at that scorecard from the policy. They will ask questions around to what extent are these innovations responding, to the strategies that we have put. To what extent is it, they look at, whether it tick, the indicators that they might have put for themselves and all that. And if whatever innovations that is happening tick those boxes, they might give it maybe a B or B plus.
That they would give themselves a B plus, or you would give them a B plus?
No, I mean, so it depends on, and here I'm talking about, I'm putting myself in the shoes of the different stakeholders that I work with. Okay, so the very same innovation, depending on which perspective you're looking at. If you are looking at it from the policy point of view, it's more like an elephant. When you have an elephant and maybe let me just go back. There is a story that I like to use of an elephant, and I think it's not my creation. I learned it from elsewhere, where you have 6 blind men or blind women, or maybe blindfolded people who have never seen an elephant before, and they touch the elephant. So somebody who touches the leg of the elephant will think, oh, an elephant is like a trunk. Somebody who touches the ear of the elephant, oh, it's like a very huge fan of some sort. And somebody so depending on which part of the elephant that person is touching, their interpretation of what it is different. And I'm using this as an example to respond to your question of the scorecard. If it's a policymaker, they might give it a B because whatever innovation or whatever is happening has ticked all the boxes in terms of, addressing the strategy, or it's looking at, those indicators and all that. But on the other hand, if you have in the room where you have researchers will be looking at the same innovation, but they are looking at, different areas. in most cases, they'll be looking at, does it really address, the gender, gaps? They're looking at, the very same issue, but looking at whether it's addressing the gender issues and all that, and they might give it a different scorecard. But if I work with farmers, the farmers will look at the same innovation. They will be asking, to what extent is it helping me to access the markets? To what extent is this innovation helping me to mitigate against climate change? To what extent is this innovation helping us to address soil fertility and that kind of thing? So if it doesn't address that, even if the policymaker would have given it a B because it has ticked all the boxes around their strategies, a farmer can give it a D or an E or an F if it doesn't address those things. Yeah. I think the point I'm making here is that when we look at these different scorecards, it can never be a one size fits all. It is all relative. It all depends on the perspective at which you're looking at. And I'm using these examples because it's at some point when I'm facilitating this work, I do get all these different perspectives in one room. Then I have a responsibility as a facilitator to create a platform where no one perspective is superior to the other, but how do they coexist and really try to see, things from each other's perspective and really trying to find, a common ground.
Well, and I think that gives you objectivity, first of all. And I think it allows you to have a spherical conversation about these things as opposed to an interest group or one person getting sort of benefiting more than the other groups that are involved in this very sort of complex conversation that you need to have. You have to have everybody's input and then be able to sort of be impartial about it when you're delivering it.
Yes, absolutely. And I call the kind of facilitation that I do facilitation of systemic change. So it actually forces people to look at everything from a systems perspective, not only from the leg of the elephant that I'm touching, but really how does an elephant look like? It becomes an elephant if it has all these different parts. And even if one part is not my area of, maybe mandate, but people need to understand that it is part of the whole. Yes. Mm.
And I would imagine also that there's cultural relativity that comes into play when you're having these discussions as well. It's not just the different stakeholders, it's where you are regionally. I imagine is different as well.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Hearing about the elephant, we know all different people, different groups are seeing the elephant differently. According to you, it's whose job is it to bring all these parts together and look at the elephant in a way as it's an elephant? Who should be responsible for that?
Well, I think everybody has to play a role. And when we talk about innovations, as we have started the conversation, government has a huge responsibility to play. They have a huge responsibility to play in terms of leveling the playing field. The role of government is to make sure that, the rules of the games are, the rules of the game. So they actually put this enabling environment, as we call it, enabling environment for farmers, enabling environment for private sector, enabling environment for researchers and all that. So they do really have a role to play. But also farmers as well have a role to play. Private sector, or big corporate, researchers, everybody has a role to play. And I think as different people play these different roles, I always say they need to be mindful to understand that their actions affect everyone else. So it cannot be, oh, I do this as long as I benefit, I don't care, how it affects the others. And I think people need to think in terms of systems. They need to think to say, and once people begin to understand that my role or whatever action I take affects everyone else. And I hope that, those people, they begin to act differently. They become mindful about, the ripple effect that, comes as a result of, the actions. And we're talking about, I know this is more like an ideal situation, but I think if everybody will think like that, then half of the challenges that we are dealing with in the world today will be solved.
100%. We just did a fascinating interview with an Indigenous leader who was talking about food security in Northern Ontario in Canada. And he sort of introduced the notion of mutual care, and that a lot of the problems would be solved if everybody sort of adopted this notion of mutual care and looking after the people around you. How do you feel about, and maybe the nature of your job is such that you're not allowed to have an opinion, like public broadcasters are not allowed to have an opinion about the news. Maybe you're not allowed to have an opinion about how this is all going. How do you think it's going?
Well, with the kind of work that I do, I try to be as neutral as possible. And the reason why I try to be as neutral as possible, it's because my role as a facilitator, sometimes I find myself having to mitigate, or maybe to mediate, between, different perspective and all that. So in my little corner there, definitely when I speak to myself, I will have an opinion about this. I'm like, this.
I do all of these conversations in the shower before I have to talk to anybody else. I just get it all out so that it doesn't slip out somewhere else.
Absolutely, I do that. But, in the public spaces like this, I'm very, very conscious about what I say. I'm very conscious about how I behave, because in the end, I have to be seen as that person who can actually bring, even the different conflicting, ideas together. And I have very, very good examples of that, of meetings where, people come and they are thinking, it's like they are throwing stones at each other and all that. But because of, that role that I play as a mediator, you do find that, people begin to, look at things, objectively and maybe trying to work together. So, yeah.
It's a lot of responsibility to set the tone for these conversations.
Absolutely. And it works perfectly because I do a lot of, workshops and all that. And depending on the type of workshop that I do, sometimes I bring, these facilitation principles that I talk about, where it really allows everybody to have a safe space and all that. And I do get feedback. Recently, somebody said, what I liked in this workshop is that I was heard. Just that, it makes a huge difference for somebody to feel, what, I was given a safe space for me to say something and I was listened to. So for me, those are things that I never take for granted.
Is it right for me to categorize and say that you've worked a lot in the innovation space around food security? Is that a correct statement? Perfect. Now, can you give us a few examples that comes to your mind in the last 1 year, or something that you thought, like, what, somebody needs to scale this up and scale this out and scale this deep. Somebody should work on this. Is there any example like that?
There are a lot of examples. Maybe for me, just to give a perspective, is that I work across the board. So I use something that I call PERFECT. And PERFECT is just an acronym. It doesn't mean that, things are perfect. So at any given time, I work across the PERFECT continuum. I'll just go through the PERFECT very quick. So the first one is policies. So where we met, Suma, it was at FAO, which is a policy space. So there will be a lot of, things around the policy space which are worth, scaling. Last week, I was facilitating a workshop here in South Africa but it was a workshop around the SADC region. So the SADC region is one of the sub-regional, they call it, the REX, the sub-regional programs within, Africa. So in the SADC region, we're looking at, 16 countries that are part of that. So they were looking at the strategy of the next 5 years. They were validating, their regional agriculture investment plan. As they were talking about how the outlook looked like, for the next 5 years, they had to step back and say, what have we achieved? Okay. So there were a lot of, interesting things that they were talking about, what they have achieved, putting, harmonization of policies and many other things. So those definitely are the things that are ready to be scaled. And as they were looking into the future, they were looking at things that worked well, and they will say, here we have achieved this, and then in the next 5 years, this is what we need to actually look at. But they were not looking at whether we scale up, we scale out, or we scale deep. But as I was facilitating, I could see that, here it's about, scaling up. Here it's about scaling out, and then here it's about scaling deep. So there are many, many interesting things that are happening there. So the E is around education. So I work a lot within the education space. And I see a lot of interesting things that are happening, organizations that are innovating around, education and how to bring, a better, education within the agri-food systems and all that. And you're looking at, your learning academies that we have seen the FAO putting together. I have, the Global Forum for Rural Advisory Services. They also bring, this learning kit and all that, and many other people. And all of these things are really, really moving and it's going to scale. I also work a lot within the research space with the researchers. As I'm talking now, the CG, which is the consultative group for International Agriculture Research Consortium, they are in in Kenya this whole week, where it's a science week. And they're talking about all the innovations that have been generated over the years and how can they actually put everything into scale. Very brilliant things, but I'm sure they will be talking a lot. How do we move these innovations from the shelves and then let's really put it, where the farmers can actually access it and all that. I could go on and on and on around, the perfect. But let me just finish the perfect. I'm not going to give examples, but the point I'm making is that within each letter of the perfect, there are a lot of the interesting that can actually be scaled, either up, out, or deep. F, it's the farming community, farmers and all that, but also finance. We have a lot of, finance models that we see. The other E is extension and advisory services, which is very, very close to my heart. 80% of the work that I do, it's within, the context of extension and advisory services. C is communications. And here I lump, issues around your M&E, knowledge management and all that. And, then the T is technologies and trades. So along every letter of the perfect, we see a lot of, interesting things that exist out there which are ready to go to scale.
That's exciting.
That's very exciting. One of the things that I'm going to bring back the conversation to FAO and the UN.
Can I just interrupt you? Can
Sure.
you explain to people what FAO stands for again?
Absolutely. It's a Food and Agriculture Organization
Okay.
of the United Nations.
I think it's important for people who are
It
not
is.
in the food space,
Totally.
such as myself.
Okay, maybe let me just come in as well. Because also a lot of people ask me a lot about FAO and the UN and all that. I think to simplify it, I like to simplify things. People need to understand the United Nations as a global government. As much as we have our own government in Canada, you have your government and each government will have different departments or ministries, as other people will call it. So the United Nations is structured in the same way. In Canada, you probably have the Department of Agriculture. So FAO, it's more like the Department of Agriculture for this UN global government.
That's very well said.
It is very well said. And also, I have another question for the food Luddites in the room. Well, I have two actually. First of all, generally speaking, are all the countries of the world members of the United Nations? There are only two of them that are considered associate countries, but everybody
Yes.
else is
Else
considered.
is-
Okay.
yeah.
So more specifically in food, can you explain very briefly what an agri-food system is?
In most cases, when people think about agriculture, they think about primary production. And I know it a lot because when I tell people that I'm working in agriculture, the follow-up question is, are you a farmer? Because people tend to think of agriculture from primary production. Okay. But yes, primary production, I would say, is the heart of agriculture. But the heart alone doesn't make a body. If my heart will be moving there, it doesn't make Hlami. I need my heart, but I also need, all the other things. And the heart, it's very core, because if your heart stops, then you are gone. But for my heart to function, there are different other functions. There are eyes and legs and brain and all that and whatnot. So agriculture, it's the same. So you have primary production, but there are many other functions. Like I said, you can look at the perfect. You have researchers, you have, policymakers and all that. But you also have the value chain, agricultural value chain. You have the processors, you have transport, you have all the different parts that make agriculture function as a system. So the notion of agri-food systems, it forces people to understand agriculture beyond primary production, to understand absolutely, to look at all the different parts of the system. So once we look at it, and all these different parts are interlinked, whatever happens from one part, it affects the other part.
See, that's very helpful.
That's
Thank
super helpful.
you. Okay, I'm not in the food space at all, so I come from a sort of social justice background. So I don't take for granted that other people know these acronyms or these expressions, these terms that you're using. I think it's important
100%.
to
I think
clarify.
and the way you explained it is fantastic.
It was beautiful, actually. You are a
crystal
poet,
clear.
as it turns out. You get to use your poetry in your work as well, which is very nice.
So we have been listening to some amazing conversations. You have been listening to that. And Dr. Hlami, I'm going to say thank you today, but we're not letting you go, because next week we're going to be back with continuing this conversation. Are you excited?
I'm super excited.
Yeah, you're so full of knowledge, and so it's amazing.
And poetry, knowledge and poetry.
I love it. So thank you so much, and keep watching. I hope you subscribe and you're following, because next week we are back with another episode with Dr. Hlami.